So yesterday, Judge Mehta found that Google was an illegal monopoly in search. The most interesting thing is generative AI and how its rise really is the first credible attack on Google's search monopoly. Welcome to Telltales. I'm Mike Nicoletti. Every week, along with my co-hosts Jason Wallace and Hunt Lawrence, we bring you the cash flow memo. Get it at telltales.us. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to dive deep into energy, technology, and healthcare. So download the memo now and get started.
The following conversation is intended for informational purposes only. You should always do your own work to determine if an investment is suitable for you.
Let's start. Exhibit C is all macro. In the past week, of course, Putin's gotten even more intractable and is running larger drone raids and missile raids and whatnot on the Ukraine. So I think more sanctions on Russian oil are for sure. The Ayatollah Khomeini finally had a public outing, Friday prayers, and he said he had no interest. The Iranian state had no interest in negotiating directly with the U.S. on sanctions relief. So the price of oil is, stuck in that 62, 63 range, and no backwardation, which is interesting. In other words, the future price is about the same as the current price. And I guess we'll be here until further notice. If we didn't have the surplus production from Saudi, Abu Dhabi, UAE, we'd probably have much higher oil prices. But as long as we have that kind of surplus ability to produce, and fairly weak as you look at demand, liquid fuels consumption in the second half of Exhibit C, we're up only 400,000 barrels in terms of demand. So the combination of weak demand and the extra production, especially in those two OPEC stalwarts, Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi, we'll just kind of level out here, I think, in the 63, 64 range. An interesting phenomenon is at 66, 63, 4, there will be lower drilling, lower completions in the U.S. basins, especially the Permian. So U.S. production, which had gone up and reached something in excess of 13 million barrels, up from 11.9 in 22, will flatten out or decline. And I believe in overseas basins, OPEC and non-OPEC, projects will be finished, but they'll be slow to start at this oil price. So that surplus capacity of 3 million barrels or so may take care of itself over the next 18 months or so. Now, in contrast to that, natural gas, and here we're over on Exhibit B, has done kind of a swoon. Gas price for 25 had been holding steadily over 4 and 26, 4 and a quarter. They're both down, and the near month is down under $3. I think in the table where there's an estimated 26 forecast, what you see is that increase in production from 106 to 108 in dry gas production is pretty well established. The Platts numbers we're regularly doing 108 now, so that's a pretty good forecast for 26. Power demand is flat, which is a surprise since it's been increasing steadily for the last several years. I think with the Trump administration, more coal plants are running rather than being retired is one explanation. Residential commercial is, basically weather. LNG is up nicely, but the lift in demand is, just kind of keeping pace with the lift in production. So when we thought we'd had a pretty well-established $4 price, now granted, October is a shoulder month, which means the months between summer and winter, or when we get to the spring between winter and summer, when demand is so much lower, but still it's kind of disappointing for gas. Exhibit A, cash flow statement for the U.S. government, is going to be in the news a lot over the next time between now and October 1, because the Congress and the administration has to agree on either passing budgets regular way or having a continuing resolution. So It'll be in the news a lot. There's been quite a lot of publicity this week about 10-year interest rates. Not so much our market, but the Japanese market, the UK market, the French market, French bonds, sovereign bonds. There's this perception that people, even if short-term rates, Fed funds rate or policy rate come down, that 10-year rate will hold. So that'll be something to watch in the next couple of weeks. But anything more, Mike or Jason?
On the macro front, there's a couple things. On the Fed, I mean, aside from the federal funds rate, everything else is a market. So the federal funds rate being abnormally low or abnormally high, what's the impact to that? I think mainly the impact is there's a carry trade that can exist between the Fed funds rate and then the shorter dated maturities, which can lead to an overall like general decrease in rates, but only so much without adding a lot more risk to the system. So I don't know. I think it's probably logical that rates are up, and then you're looking at, to kind of beat that home, the U.S. dollar has now declined to be below in value in central bank holdings around the world than the gold that's being held by those central banks. So you have a little bit of this just supply demand for people maybe preferred to hold dollars in other central banks, and now they're holding more gold.
I agree with that, and I'm sure Jason will agree with that. But I do think Exhibit A, if we can take the deficit from this fiscal year, which ends the end of this month, from roughly just under 2 trillion down to 1.5 trillion, which I think is feasible, we're going to be outperforming these other economies in terms of trying to shrink our fiscal deficit. So whether it's interest rates on 10-year U.S. bonds or the value of the U.S. dollar, if we can accomplish this shrinkage, it's nowhere near enough. The right target is to get down to $1 trillion, and how to get the next 500 billion is a real issue. But I think getting on a downward trajectory with that, where the debt as a percentage of GNP stabilizes and goes down, I think I hate to sound like Trump, to be a booster like Trump, but I think we will outperform Europe and Japan, and frankly also China. I think China has some real debt problems. Their sovereign debt looks okay, but they got debt everywhere in their provinces and state-owned enterprises, and it's kind of a hangover from having put like a quarter of the economy into commercial and residential real estate, and then completely overbuilding and trying to cope with the aftermath of that. As I say, I don't want people making fun of me for being a booster like Trump, but I do think there's a chance for the U.S. economy to outperform between now and, say, this time next year.
I think it's fair to say it's the least bad currency.
Not as good as gold, but the least bad.
Yeah. Jason,
we haven't heard from, here we're going on about macro, and you've been quiet. We need a comment from you.
I mean, I agree. It's great that we're finding $500 billion, but there's more progress to be made. I have a long-term view that AI is going to greatly increase our productivity, grow our economy. Hopefully we can capture that increase in productivity by savings or not growing our budget nearly as much in the future. So hopefully we grow our way out of this deficit.
Yeah. I guess we have to start, because it's the most recent news, we probably have to start with the Google antitrust decision. And Mike having a life companion as a litigator. Jason and I are going to turn this over to Mike.
So yesterday, Judge Mehta found that Google was an illegal monopoly in search, but did not break it up, did not force them to divest Chrome or Android, which were some of the suggested remedies by the Justice Department. What it must do is end its exclusive search deals, but it's still allowed to continue to pay for search placement and distribution. So that means Apple can continue to receive the $20 billion plus each year. there are some requirements that aren't super clear yet, that Google must share certain search index and user interaction data with competitors on a marginal cost basis, so pretty darn close to zero. But it was not so overreaching that it seems like it will impair their business. The most interesting thing I think about it is that the Supreme Court in historic monopoly antitrust rulings has been so late to the game and so backwards looking that it was ruling in businesses that were already losing their monopoly. And Judge Mehta had a discussion in this ruling about generative AI and how its rise really is the first credible attack on Google search monopoly. So they felt like this credible competition, it would be unfair or unjust maybe to overly penalize Google when they're undergoing a pretty significant competitive threat. So clearly a win for Google. The DOJ is talking about doing an appeal because they wanted something stricter. But broadly, this is a huge win for Google and really for Apple.
Jason is the Apple bear. So is this going to get him? This going to satisfy the Apple bear as being good news for Apple?
It might flip me. You'll like it. I was just going to say that I thought the judge's actions are really very thoughtful. A big part of antitrust enforcement is looking for consumer harm. And part of his discussion there was if he prevented Google from paying to be the default search option on iPhone, you're potentially going to get an inferior product on the iPhone and it costs you more. Kind of interesting take on why he didn't prevent that payment. And I think this is a big win for OpenAI as well. So they're building out a web index as kind of the way to source truth on the internet. And they're going to get a head start here if they're going to be able to purchase Google's PageRank and indexing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The thing to think through is making Google end its exclusive search deals. Does that harm or does it help Google? Or does it harm or does it help Apple? And we're kind of wrestling through the implications of that. And in the case of making it non-exclusive, if your next best alternative, for example, for Apple for search on the iPhone is Microsoft Bing, and Bing reasonably can pay $5 billion or $10 billion for that access, then what's stopping Google from negotiating that down? Instead of paying 20, paying 11 or 12 or whatever. But there's a flip side scenario too, which we discussed.
Yeah. So when we initially were talking about it, we were saying Google's safe. No one's going to outbid Google for this business, but that's not necessarily true. So there's one company with the means and motive, I guess, to do that, and it would be Meta, the company. They could potentially outbid Google. Zuckerberg is spending a tremendous amount of money on AI. He can make the investment to be the default search, the default gateway to the internet, if you will, on an iPhone, and then direct all queries into either Llama or another service, but it's within Meta's app system. So the implications there are, rather than going through the browser and you're searching the internet the same way, you're getting an entrance into an AI algorithm, probably app-based. And then if that's the case, it's within Apple's App Store ecosystem. So it's important to remember everything in their App Store ecosystem is subject to their 30% app fees. And potentially that means Apple's going to capture all commerce that takes place within a phone, within the iPhones, subject to their 30% fees. So it's definitely in Apple's interest if this were something that could possibly play out.
So nobody really knows where this is going to go, but that's our hypothesizing.
At the same time, though, Apple's announced that they're in discussion with Google to make Gemini the power, the engine behind Siri. So,
and then Meta's also in discussion with Google to use some part of maybe Gemini and or their TPUs as part of their service. I think the big thing here, what's happening on the AI front, is that the whole industry is capacity constrained. Sam Altman said publicly that they have better models that they would like to release, but they can't because of capacity. The idea that Meta is talking to Google about using some of their models and or their chips for training tells me that they're actually short on capacity as well. So I think, ChatGPT 5 being sort of a disappointing release, I think there's a story here that's sort of being missed, is that the whole industry is still very, very heavily capacity constrained.
Yeah. And I think clearly you can say that Meta is not going down a path of transitioning to a Google TPU and using Google Cloud. They're spending $50 billion to build an NVIDIA-based data center right now, and they're not scrapping that plan. So I kind of agree. It's probably a capacity issue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What are the implications here for NVIDIA? I mean, let me just lead off by saying that it's possible that the Chinese government can cause Chinese users of chips to avoid the H20s and maybe also avoid the dumbed-down Blackwells. NVIDIA famously in their second quarter didn't have any revenues from China. I mean, how much of a threat is the Google version of GPU, or for that matter, Amazon's version of GPU, and, a concentrated campaign, whether it's Huawei or Alibaba, to make GPUs that will have Chinese providers of language models competitive with whatever Gemini or OpenAI or XAI or Llama can turn out. We were talking about macro earlier. This is tech macro, about as macro as you can get.
I think long term, both of those are big competitors to NVIDIA, the TPU and homegrown Chinese chips. China's strategy is and always has been to be able to produce this technology domestically. And I think they're using the opportunity now with the restrictions on chips, on NVIDIA's chips specifically, as a way to drive Huawei to innovate and make the software companies within China to use those chips. They don't have the same energy constraints as we do. Their chips aren't as capable, but they can use many more of them and power them. So it's kind of a brute force way of doing it. And I think long term, the TPU there's clearly going to be a case for having a TPU, which is an ASIC, so a very specialized chip, and a general purpose GPU. If AI inference becomes a commodity and Google has TPUs that perform it at a much lower cost, they're going to have an advantage there.
There's a couple different strategies here, and basically it all boils down to, call it cost per token, all in, right? When you have Google, where you have a fairly vertically integrated model outside of power production, they're able to save some costs. They design the chips, there's no NVIDIA markup, all that stuff. In China, you have government policy that could basically make energy prices zero and already have lower energy prices. So you could suffer with less performant chips given the rules at play there. And then with NVIDIA, you're going to get the company that's releasing the latest, greatest thing at a cadence that nobody else can keep up with year to year. And so,
yeah, I think something people don't talk about is Jensen's well aware of this, the CEO of NVIDIA, and he's discussed that the company has transitioned from supplying training chips to chips that are good at training and inference. And they have in the past produced kind of specialty one-off chips for low power applications for robotics. I don't think it's out of the question that they produce an inference, call it a TPU, or they'll probably come up with their own branding on it, but a specialty inference chip.
Yeah, whatever the market needs, they're going to be there to provide for sure. Look, the latest, the GB300, I mean, the stats on that are pretty phenomenal. And then the Rubin series, the stats on inference are all pretty phenomenal. Pretty clear that the demand in the market is shifting to inference.
How about healthcare in the remaining 5 minutes or so?
Do you want to start, Mike? Mike actually has some news this week.
Oh, do I? The Texas mandating nutrition label? Yeah. I thought this was an interesting one. So Texas is going to force the labeling of banned ingredients from other developed countries. So if you're producing, Cheez-Its or whatever, and if there's some ingredients in Cheez-Its that are banned in European countries, Japan, et cetera, they will have to put that on the box. It'll be interesting to see if other states pick this up, or if something happens within the FDA to start disclosing this sort of stuff. The other things that they passed was a ban on junk food for SNAP, which is the food stamp program, and then some mandates on nutrition education in K-12 and for doctors and nurses as well.
Yeah. I'm personally a huge fan of this.
It's common sense stuff.
There's so many ingredients that we just don't check that we use in the US that are banned globally, and we're consuming them here. Elsewhere, what has been going on? There's more upheaval at the CDC, HHS. The director that was nominated by the White House to run the CDC was removed after a month. That's caused a lot of upset by the rank and file at the CDC and some protesting. I don't have enough information to make a judgment whether that was the right thing or not, but my takeaway is a little different than others I've seen, in that she was in the role for 1 month. She was hired by the current administration, and the best thing you can do if you're running a company and you hire someone that doesn't fit into the role is to fire them fast. I don't know if that was the case here or not, but I think potentially if that was the case, it wasn't a bad thing to occur, but it's leading to more negative headlines.
Everyone talks Magna. They talk MAHA, MAHA. Aren't they coming out with some kind of a report that'll cover the whole waterfront in terms of food ingredients, viruses, vaccines, the way the government is organized, and every part of healthcare? I think kind of a white paper that is imminent.
And then also they promised to investigate potential causes of autism. Yeah. And I know there's a lot of talk about just lumping RFK into the anti-vaccine bucket, and he's definitely a vaccine skeptic. I would say that the FDA is still approving, vaccines, and specifically COVID vaccines. They've changed the mandate of it's at-risk individuals that are to receive it. That really aligns with the rest of the world. So I guess I don't understand a lot of the upset there specifically, but there's a lot more vaccine skepticism. And I think it might not be completely justified, but I think in the past we've gone down the path of just accepting what the companies put forward and putting that vaccine into the schedule. And maybe the pendulum swings too far the other way, but at least I'm hopeful that there's a discussion around when vaccines are given. Not the fact that we should or shouldn't, but like, when does a child receive a vaccine in their life? And should they be given a lot of vaccines on the day after they're born?
I don't want to be the arbiter of what is right and what's wrong, but what I do want to see is that there is a
debate.
A debate, yeah. I mean, what is the point of science if not to debate? And I think we've gotten away from that a little bit. So I know some people may think that we're a little bit too forgiving of this administration's approach to healthcare, but I think from a fundamental first principles perspective, I think their approach is much more conducive to advancement than the previous.
Yeah. And if nothing else, flip over the apple cart and figure out if what you were doing before was the right way or not.
Totally. Yeah.
Right. Good. How about in the remaining 2 minutes, just a preview of biotech history? What century are you going to start in? You took us all the way back to the middle of the 19th century with punch cards, but where will biotech start?
Probably early 20th century. What do you?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think you have to start with penicillin. Maybe you could go a little bit earlier than that.
Yeah.
But
We were finding the first drugs in mold and slime and dirt. And that's how we were looking for them to discover them as well.
yeah, that was the cool part. I mean, imagine being a chemist back then when you were like, okay, I'm going to go to the foothills of Mount Fiji and dig around and see if I can find some interesting sludge so I can bring it back to my lab and run some analysis on it. That would have been a cool time to be a chemist.
Yeah.
Right.
Also, the people that worked at these early biotechs were being paid to go on, not paid to go on the vacation, but when they were on vacation, if they brought back samples of dirt, they were paid for them.
A really cool explorer mentality that I think, I don't know, I'm not a chemist, but it seems like might not get to do that as much anymore.
Good. Well, listen, we're finishing more or less on time. We've gone over the last couple of Wednesdays. We'll be here exactly 7 days from now. Be well and stay healthy, and talk in 7 days. Take care.
The views expressed on this podcast are the hosts alone and do not constitute an offer to sell or a recommendation to purchase or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security nor a recommendation for any investment product or service. While certain information contained herein has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, neither the hosts nor any of their employers or their affiliates have independently verified this information, and its accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. Accordingly, no representation or warranty, expressed or implied, is made as to, and no reliance should be placed on, the fairness, accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of this information. The hosts and all employers and their affiliated persons assume no liability for this information and no obligation to update the information or analysis contained herein in the future, and may or may not hold positions in the securities mentioned.